Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the SARChI-ID and Econ 3x3 Policy Dialogue and Website Launch, jointly hosted by SARChI-ID, Econ 3x3, and the SARChI Industrial Development at University of Johannesburg. My name is Phumzile Ncube, and I'll be your MC for today. Without further ado, to open the dialogue, we'd like to welcome our Dean of the College of Business and Economics, Professor Dani Moloi from University of Johannesburg, to deliver welcoming remarks. Thanks, Prof.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you're all well. So I try to sit as far away as possible from those front desks under normal circumstances. So if you're sitting there at a Senate meeting, so you get fried. So that's why. So if I do get the opportunity, I sit as far away as possible. Esteemed guests, colleagues, practitioners, and partners, good afternoon. Welcome to the great University of Johannesburg. Welcome to the mighty College of Business and Economics, the only college amongst faculties at the University of Johannesburg. So the only college that has 6 schools and 3 SARChI chairs and 13 departments at the University of Johannesburg. So the only college that has been ranked #1 for teaching business and economics by the Times Higher Education. So welcome. So we are happy to have you here, and we are indeed proud of the journey that we've traveled over the last 20 years. By the way, this year is the 20th anniversary, the 20th birthday of this University of Johannesburg. Colleagues, esteemed guests, practitioners, partners, as a university, we are committed to shaping inclusive and sustainable development. And our DSI NRF SARChI Chair in Industrial Development is a central pillar in this effort, driving rigorous research that addresses the challenges and opportunities of sustainable industrialization, decent employment, and technological change. It's my honor to welcome you to this important dialogue on employment policy, technology, and South Africa's future of work. We are happy as the College of Business and Economics, as the great University of Johannesburg, to host this event and website launch in partnership with the SARChI-ID, UNU-WIDER, and Econ 3x3, and to support a discussion that goes to the heart of our country's economic and social future. South Africa's high unemployment and inequality levels, the evolving nature of work due to digitization and climate transitions, demand bold and agent thinking and evidence-based responses. Today's dialogue exemplifies our commitment to building strong research policy linkages and fostering multi-stakeholder engagements that addresses these challenges of our time and of the future. As the University of Johannesburg, the great one, with a strategic emphasis on societal impact and sustainability, global footprint and partnership, as well as the technologies of the future, we are especially proud of the SARChI Chair in ID, SARChI Chair Industrial Development, led by Professor Fiona Trigina, in facilitating this timely and impact-driven research and policy dialogue. We hope that today's engagement will not only generate insights, but also catalyze practical interventions and pathways for actions. So I encourage all of us as academics, policymakers, and practitioners alike to freely and actively engage, share ideas, and help bridge the gap between research and policy for a more inclusive and resilient economic future. Thank you once more. Welcome once again to this great architecture that we call home, the University of Johannesburg.
Thank you so much, Prof. We now turn to Andrew Donaldson from Econ 3x3, who will speak about the role of Econ 3x3 in bridging research and policy, and he'll say a few words about the new phase of partnership with SARChI-ID. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and let me start by saying on behalf of SARChI-ID and SALRU and Econ 3x3, special thanks to Professor Malloy and Professor Tregener for hosting us in this magnificent venue. It's very good to be with you at the University of Johannesburg. A few words from me on the background to Ready 3x3. This is a project that was started as part of the research project on employment, income distribution, and inclusive growth, which was established and funded by the Treasury shortly after the Great Recession of 15, 16 years ago. It's a research project that generated 60, 70 research papers, still available on our website. That website still needs a little updating, but we'll get to that. It generated a book of collected papers on the informal sector in South Africa, a book in partnership with the HSRC on migrant labor issues, and a rather wonderful summary of the report of the research done in that program, written by Pippa Green, entitled A Measure of Our Ills and How We Might Fix Them. That's available on the website as well. It's a research program that was convened by Professor Rodrik. So we worked project done in partnership with the University of the Free State. And he was the initial founding editor of Econ 3x3, established as an online forum to provide in a more accessible way the research findings generated by the research project, but also to provide a broader forum for publication of policy-oriented papers focused broadly on that theme of inclusive growth, employment creation in South Africa. So I do want to start off just by acknowledging the important and creative leadership that Rodrik provided in setting up Econ 3x3. I think there are probably several people here in the audience and online who share with me sort of memories of Rodrik's very intrusive, often somewhat abrasive editing style, because he had and gave to Econ 3x3 a very clear commitment to rigorous analysis, clarity of expression, making sure that economic findings were not obscured by econometrics or inaccessible mathematics, but nonetheless presented logical and coherent arguments. And that, I think, is a commitment that remains central to this undertaking. Well, I also want to just acknowledge many people who've contributed to Econ 3x3 over the years. In particular, I want to mention Wandile Sihlobo, wants to be on our panel today, but I think he can't be here. But he is far and away, head and shoulders above anybody else as the sort of multiple contributor to Econ 3x3. And there have been several others with him. I'm not going to go through names. And I hope that those who are with us today and participating in the discussion and have contributed in the past, but also others, will join in the Econ 3x3 publication program of the period ahead. Econ 3x3 has been edited by Pippa Green for the last few years, based at SALRU, and there have been discussions for a while between SALRU and the UNU-WIDER program, UNU-WIDER, based in Helsinki, and the South Africa Towards Inclusive Economic Development Southern Africa research program that is supported by UNU-WIDER in partnership with the Treasury and other government departments. And I need to particularly acknowledge Kunal Sen, the director of UNU-WIDER's willingness to partner with us in taking this forward, developing an updated and improved website, hosting this policy dialogue, and I think in future we'll do policy events of this kind, dialogue events of this kind from time to time again, and also putting some funding into expanding the research program, the publication program that Econ 3x3 will continue with over the period ahead. And Pippa Green will tell us a bit more about that later in the program today. I should also say a word of thanks to the staff of UNU-WIDER, Dominic Etienne, Annette Victorero, Ketsia Lillenstein, who's here, but especially Abner Labi-Odram, who has really led this project of preparing for a policy dialogue today, getting the website ready. She's led that process with patience, professionalism, and I can tell you an extraordinary laser-like attention to deadlines. So I'm signaling here that Econ 3x3 is opening up to a more expansive program of publications on policy-oriented work over the period ahead, which Pippa will talk about a bit later. It's a broader forum for discussion. But I think we also know that while many voices have to be heard in South Africa's policy dialogues, we also have to find a greater focus and a greater clarity, a clearer strategic vision for our economic development path ahead. Growth that creates work opportunities, what I've called in a paper that's on the new website now, South Africa's crisis of abundance, the human resources that we've not succeeded yet in bringing into productive activity has to be right at the center of that challenge of policy development that faces us ahead. And so it did seem right that there would be nobody better to introduce us to our topic for discussion today than Professor Dani Rodrik. As many of you know, he serves on our Presidential Economic Advisory Council. He's also one of the most eminent international development economists and scholars. And I was particularly struck 20 years ago by his paper on growth strategies, which was a review of approaches to economic growth across the world, with a very, very clear and important message for all of us that there are lessons from international experience. There is good practice, but every country has to find its own, has to customize its own development strategy and growth path, taking into account its own circumstances. And of course, right at the center of those circumstances in our context is high unemployment. And so, to kick off our discussion, we're going to hear a few words from Dani Rodrik. He is the Ford Foundation Professor of International Political Economy at Harvard's J.F. Kennedy School of Government. He's widely published on economic development, growth, leads a program on reimagining the world economy and focus on inclusive prosperity worldwide. And we had a discussion with him on economic strategy and economic strategy in the context of the challenges that South Africa faces. So we're going to move now to a sort of video recording of a few minutes of discussion with Professor Dani Rodrik, and then we'll hand over to our panel and the rapporteur and discussant for the afternoon's proceedings. Thank you very much.
In the case of South Africa, it's so clear what the priority is, because South Africa stands out as a country where the unemployment and underutilization of its most plentiful resource, which is labor, is so blatant, so striking, that it seems to me that putting more people to work has got to be the most important overriding strategic objective. And if we scratch the surface of that problem a little bit, it seems to me that the fundamental problem of the South African economy, when you look at it from the perspective that priority, is that there is a mismatch. There's a fundamental mismatch between the production structure of the economy. What does the South African economy produce on the one hand, and the composition of the labor force? What does its labor force actually look like? So if you think about, okay, again, taking that problem as our foundational problem of how do we reduce the mismatch between the production structure and the labor force composition, just logically, there are only three ways in which you can achieve that. You can increase the skills of the labor force, so the labor force composition looks more like your production structure. You can reduce the skill intensity of your existing production structure, or you can stimulate production in the relatively more labor-intensive, labor-absorbing sectors. Logically, those are the only three things that will alleviate that mismatch. So I think those are naturally I mean, they have a kind of a different, sequence. Increasing the skills of the labor force. That's one of our sort of developmental or growth fundamentals. Improving, investing in human capital. Absolutely, but it's a long-term objective, and it's not going to solve the immediate problem or even the medium-term problem. So I think that the first element of those tripartite set of objectives, increasing the skills of the labor force, is an ongoing process. So it needs to be complemented by a more short-term set of policies and goals. And that sort of then makes us look at sort of what are the two other things. The one I said, reducing the skill intensity of existing production. Well, that's very hard to do, actually. So, you can imagine trying to reduce labor costs so that your financial sector or your manufacturing, will use more low-cost labor. But it's really difficult to change the production techniques so much that you can absorb it, at least from the experience of other countries. So I don't think that particular line is very productive. So that really leaves me by process of elimination really to what I think is the most important short-term, the most urgent priority, which is stimulating the production of labor-intensive sectors. So that's going to be mostly, services, mostly small and business stuff, micro, small or medium-sized enterprises. Often very informal enterprises, currently low productivity. So I've been working, a lot of my work actually has been on trying to think about how we can deploy new types of industrial policies directing at these labor-intensive, labor-absorbing segments of the economy. And I think in South Africa that's a very important element of short-term priority. Technology also can be your friend, particularly in these kinds of sectors that I'm talking about that are labor-absorbing services. Yes, I think technology, when we think about automation or let's say, AI tools that replace workers in finance and in some higher skill sectors, that's going to be an issue. But I think in many of these labor-absorbing sectors, new digital technologies and AI can be actually very useful to complement and augment low-skilled workers and get them to be more productive, either by using digital platforms to make small businesses access larger markets, providing for digital tools and apps that enable them to become more productive, provide much more customized services. And AI that enables lower skilled workers to perform the tasks that typically higher skilled workers could do, like it's in the care sector or in the medical services sector. So those are, are possibilities.
Thanks to Prof. Rodrik for framing our dialogue so well. So now to lead the conversation, we welcome journalist and commentator Ferial Hafaji to moderate the panel. Ferial, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Phumzile. It's lovely to be with you all to discuss something which is incredibly close to my heart, and I'll share a quick story. So I started my reporting life as a labor reporter, and for me, the reason I did so was that my dad had been a clothing worker all his life, and as our economy began to change as the freedom years came, he lost his job. And the only thing that stood between us and absolute disaster was that he was a member of a trade union. And then after that, I retained this great interest in employment. He also said that I should really write about and support this organization called Men on the Side of the Road, because as people began to lose their formal jobs, so they began to look for informal work. And supporting them meant buying them a screwdriver or some piece of equipment that they may need in order to earn a living that was then just survivalist, and today I would argue still is. Now I'm a cities reporter. I write mostly about the collapse of Joburg, although it's very beautiful, and UJ is a special university. But what I have noticed is that from Men on the Sides of the Road, we now have Men in the Parks, where across our country, and I see it very much in our city, people have simply given up looking for work. as if this economy is never ever going to make a space for you. And so I've come to understand that job creation isn't just about employment policy, although it is about that, and we'll talk about it, or about industrial, or about economic policy. It goes to the fundaments of our constitution, and for me, it's very clearly a challenge of dignity and equality and our other very cornerstone values. So a really, really great panel here with us today. And we'll start with opening framing remarks by each of them. And Dr. Renosi Mohati, I would like to invite you to firstly open for us. You've worked in so many places serving your country, from the Reserve Bank, Presidential Economic Advisory Council, and elsewhere. The other day when we were planning for the panel, you said that you thought skills is our big issue. I wonder if you could share with us some of your initial thoughts. There's only 2 mics, colleagues, so we're going to have to share them.
Thanks. Is it on? Okay. First of all, I thank you to the organizers for inviting me, and thank you for your question. I think we've heard from Dani as well talking about skills mismatch. So for me, it is a critical aspect because the skills that you have open the gateways for you to employment, to entrepreneurship, and other ways of having a decent livelihoods. What I wanted to speak about in particular is that it's not enough for us to just talk about skills. People who have been able to obtain skills must also be employable. And so there is a need, in my view, for greater alignment and collaboration between government, public sector, and particularly employers, as well as our standard setters and regulators, in order to ensure that the skills that are actually being produced are in line with what is required, but also that there is a responsiveness in our skills development and training processes to very quickly enable people to, to pivot and to realign with what is available in the market. I also think that it's not just about employment, it's also about other policies supporting the employment process. So for example, we talk about youth unemployment. Youth are actually young adults, young mothers, young families. So if they're going to be able to participate in the economy, our social policies must also support them. So for example, access to good quality, affordable early childhood education programs will enable those young mothers and the families to actually participate in those skills development programs that we often talk about.
Thank you very much. So multifaceted challenges. Prof. Trigena, thank you very much for hosting us with Professor Molloy today. I've been reading your work for a long time. And as I observe the wastelands of Gauteng from Ekurhuleni through to Emfuleni, the deindustrialization is acute and also becoming accelerated. How do you think we can stop that, but also see a reindustrialization, certainly of the heartland, but obviously across the country as well?
Thanks, Ferial. Yes, well, obviously what we can see in Gauteng is in some ways a microcosm of the rest of the country, but it's also got its own specific features as the most economically advanced province, I think, on balance. You're right to draw attention to the deindustrialization which is there. And although there has been obviously an uptake in advanced services, finance and so on, I don't think it detracts from the need to reindustrialize and reindustrialization of different types. There's still quite vibrant industry, for example, in the East Rand, and from a policy perspective, one would want to see an expansion of that and an upgrading of that industry. Let me maybe link that back to your opening remarks and Dani's remarks about the centrality of unemployment. I think although everyone would recognize that unemployment is a big problem and so on, sometimes I feel like it's become almost normalized because it's been there for so long, and sometimes we just feel it's so intractable. But there's nothing normal about an unemployment rate, which is the official rate, more than 30%, the expanded rate, which I think is a better measure, in the region of 40%. In some other countries, once unemployment goes to like 10%, they think it's a crisis. What has to be done? Everything has to be reoriented around that. Even 20%, 25% is unimaginable in almost all of the rest of the world, maybe outside of war zones. So I agree with Dani about centering it in all aspects of policy, and not only industrial policy, monetary policy, skills development policy, fiscal policy, and so on. Having said that, and picking up also on Dani's remarks on this, I think it wouldn't be a sustainable path for us to focus exclusively on the most labor-intensive activities within the economy. Yes, in the short term, it might help us in terms of mopping up some unemployment. But ultimately, it could be a dead end for development. We have the last, let's say, about 70 years of theory and practice and country experiences drawing attention to the importance of structural transformation, upgrading, shifting towards higher productivity sectors and activities, and as well upgrading within firms. And in as much as we need to prioritize activities that absorb labor, but if you focus too much on those, you can get left further and further behind the technological frontier, and it becomes more and more difficult to catch up. So productivity doesn't matter. Innovation, technological upgrading, these all do matter as well. So from an industrial policy perspective, I think it underscores the importance of prioritizing a mix of activities. We're not in the position to just say, oh, we're only going to prioritize the most high-tech activities out there, as if we're not sitting with 40% unemployment. At the same time, we can't just say, okay, just informal sector and clothing and so on, because 5-10 years' time, I think we'll be in a worse position than now. The skills constraint is certainly there. I mean, anyone who interacts with industry will hear about the difficulties of sourcing people with the appropriate levels of skills and so on. I'm not convinced that it's a binding constraint on the South African economy. Yes, in particular niches and so on, it might be. Obviously, it adds costs to firms where they have to upskill workers and so on. Not all skills solutions have to be long-term. Not everything needs a 3-year plus university degree. A lot of upskilling can happen at the firm level. Where you have a dynamic economy, which is growing, high productivity and so on, firms will find a way to either source or locate or create those skills. So I'm not saying it's not a problem or that it's not important to address, absolutely not. But I don't think it's a binding structural constraint that would lead us to only prioritizing labor-intensive activities. I could talk more, but let me stop.
We're going to talk more, definitely. Dr. Neva Magetla, for many years now, decades, I think you've been looking at this dilemma that our economy and country faces. Did you think that by now we'd be further along the line, that we wouldn't be sitting with an expanded unemployment rate that I think is probably at about 40%, if not higher?
Yeah, you were there too. What did we think in 1993? Everything would be fabulous by 2000. Anyways,
Full employment.
Yeah. Full employment and equality, and everybody has a formal house. And excellent schooling. Anyways, going beyond that. Yeah, no, I think what we really need to think about is why, because employment has grown, but we haven't seen that qualitative shift. And personally, I prefer not to use unemployment data at all because of the subjectivity. But the employment ratio, which is the share of working-age adults with employment. And from that standpoint, 40% of working-age adults in South Africa have employment. It's been maxed out at 45% at one point. It went down to 39% in COVID. It's now like 41%. In the rest of the world, it's around 60%. And to me, that's the big issue, is where does that gap come from? And what would it mean for our economic policy if we treated that more seriously? Now, I would personally argue that, so in effect, we have to decolonize industrial policy to say, what would it mean to address our problems, not the problems they faced in East Asia 50 years ago, which is, I think, what we tend to do, or possibly in Europe today. Having said that, I think, those problems are high joblessness, very high inequalities, and also an extraordinary dependence on mining. So mining is much larger as a share of our exports than you see for other upper middle income countries, even if you exclude China. It's like for us, it's over half. For them, it's like 20 to 30%. And it's extraordinary what the difference is. And I would argue that the joblessness reflects partially that reliance on heavy industry. And how do we think about that, given that's where our, as Fiona says, that's where our strengths are. But it's also the destruction of African smallholders and urban enterprise. So compared to other countries, so like I said, there's a 20% gap in the employment ratio. In this country, 5% of people are employed or self-employed or employers. In other upper middle income countries, excluding China, it's 17%. In China, it's closer to 25%. So I would argue it's that destruction of self-employment under apartheid, which was conscious. It was to generate cheap labor, that leaves us with this employment gap. And I think, just to say very quickly, because I know we're all going on a bit, I think we have to say, what does that mean for our economic policy? And where I would disagree with Fiona is I think what that means is we need to think in a two-leg strategy where we do talk about how do we maintain established businesses, how do we grow them, how do we add new formal activities, whether in light manufacturing or services. But we also have to say, what can we do just to get people into some kind of income generating opportunities, because there are social as well as economic implications there that, as Gilead would say, the fallback is a basic income grant. And if we can't get employment, we'll have to do that, and we could do a combination. But the fact is that doesn't give people that kind of integration into society and that kind of independence from government that your own earned income does. But I think it's very hard, and I think it requires a completely different approach to standard industrial policy, because you have to find ways to work with people in much less profitable, much lower level, much less productive activities where you're pulling them out of, what they call extensive growth. You're bringing more resources in to produce rather than producing more based on productivity. And you might be producing things that people can't actually pay for, like what we do with, community services of all kinds, things like that, where where government might have to subsidize it because people can't pay. But at least you're giving people some kinds of opportunities, and they are generating benefits for society that otherwise wouldn't be there. But also things like using, contracting out and franchising and, land reform, all these things that our industrial policy institutions absolutely cannot do. So the question to me is, who's responsible for that? Should it be part of industrial policy? And if not, who is responsible for it? On the one hand, because it would have to be at a very large scale to work. And on the other hand, how do we ensure that it doesn't come at the cost of our established businesses to an extent where they stop functioning, because we do need them. And the one thing I would want to add to that is that I think if we want any industrial policy to work, we can't keep ignoring it, because in a democracy, and we are a democracy, if a policy doesn't meet the needs of the voters, that policy will never be strong enough. And I would argue that's one of our core weaknesses. Our industrial policy has never been big enough to make a big difference, partially because most voters don't see the point. They'd rather lobby for social grants where they at least get a benefit directly. Ta.
Thank you very much, Niva. Lots there. Many challenges you throw open. Gilad, I think I went to your offices in Braamfontein for the mine. Do you share them with the mining affected Union of South Africa? So these were the people who brought to all our attention what was happening at Stilfontein mine. If it wasn't for Makusa, I think that we wouldn't have known about the people in that mine, and that so many people had died. So they're also a symbol of a fracturing employment sector. They're doing exactly the things that Niva was speaking about. And what I wanted to ask you is, if the image of the worker of South Africa is where our president comes from, Mr. Mantashe as well, was the miner, then if we think about employment and employment policy today, what should be the symbol of today's worker, and how is our employment policy shaping for a very different economy?
Thanks very much, both for that question and for the invitation to be here. I don't think that there is a singular symbol for what the worker should be like, right? And I think that the heterogeneity of what a worker is at the moment, whether that is a care worker, whether that is a industrial worker, whether that is a miner, whether that's a service sector worker, is part of what needs to be kept in mind. And I think it relates to the conversation which we were having here, in part in response to Dani Rodrik's input. And there are different pathways towards a country with larger employment, if not full employment. And a part of thinking about that, and I think what goes unsaid often is that when one speaks about low-skilled employment in the way that it was put forward, the implication is often that that's ultra-low wage employment, although that's sometimes left unsaid. And I think that it's equally important when thinking about employment to also think about the nature and terms of that employment. An additional problem and obstacle, I think, besides for those which Fiona has outlined about a pathway of widespread ultra-low wage employment, is that I think it's actually incompatible with the political economy of South Africa in a politics and a policy sense. In a country with a history of subjugation, in which the workplace became a site of exploitation, to actually sell and implement a ultra-low wage growth path strategy, I think is fundamentally incompatible with the expectations of South African workers, right? And therefore unviable. I believe also, and I'll speak later about some of what I see as the obstacles to employment, that it is also unnecessary to opt for that path. But leaving that aside, I actually think that that ultra low wage option is fundamentally untenable and unviable in South Africa. And that's not to return to how you framed it, the image of the worker, which we should start off with.
Thank you very much. You know, last night I was having an interview with Joel Pollack, the guy who wanted to be the ambassador. Thank you. And I realized that there's such a value shift that's happened. He was expounding to me why he thinks that the federal workforce in America is completely overemployed and that they need to be chainsaw massacred, basically. And I realized that some of what he was laying out would never, thank God, happen in our country. But we can talk about the low-wage economy. Okay, Dr. Mark Nassala, you bring us the good news now.
Almost the good news.
Yes. So do you think that, as Prof. Dani Rodrik said, that technology can be a friend in employment creation? Because obviously all we hear about the AI era is that it will harm jobs across the board.
So I think it's important we reflect on the impact of AI and generative AI, which has been spoken a lot about in the last 2.5 years or so, on direct employment, but as well as the drivers that create the need of employment or take away the need for employment. I think what we've seen and studies by Goldman Sachs from organizations that are already mature in applying the use of generative AI, they're already realizing so much productivity by just having baseline application of this technology. An employee is likely to realize an increase of 1.5 percentage points in the way they work. But there's also one side of the coin. It's causing so much displacement because AI is impacting tasks and jobs in 4 ways. The first category is tasks, is taking away tasks. So when we're talking about automation, it's literally cutting them out. And we must be very honest and realistic about this. The second part is complementing jobs that people express themselves in their warmth. So these are jobs that require so much empathy, but less creativity. So think about teachers, trainers, they express themselves, to be able to teach, but technology is making them much better. Then we've got jobs that are much more scientific, very creative. Like think about a researcher who used to do things the normal way, source things manually. Now they're able to leverage technology to perform their work much better. Then the fourth category is where AI is driving innovation and creating new industries, creating totally new products and services. When I reflect on South Africa's socioeconomic situation and the employment rate, I think priority has to be given on policies that protect employment. When I look at the report from the World Economic Forum that was published early this year on jobs that are becoming redundant and jobs that are becoming relevant, most of the people who are employed today are in roles that could actually be automated. And therefore, we need to prioritize AI that complements them, like Professor said, augments what they do. A lot of countries are already doing that. The second part is having policies that avoids reckless investment into technology that will result to job losses. And we saw this a lot in Europe, where organizations invest in technology, but the technology doesn't provide anything different. AI does the same thing people are doing, just faster. And what happens is investors look at this from an economic perspective. You end up losing people because you're almost accumulating technology debt, right? Then there's a flip side of where we're now talking, and for those of you who are following the news, Strive announced the AI factories. Now, 9 out of the top 10 highest investors in AI, the countries, 9 out of the top 10 all-time manufacturing countries. Why? Because AI is not just driving efficiencies and digitization, it's actually creating new industries. It's complementing already existing industries, and therefore we need to think about what are the sectors we should prioritize that will create the need for employment, because that is the only way you need people to be part of what we call AI factories. So we're talking about manufacturing intelligence and being part of this global ecosystem. But that by itself is just not going to happen. There needs to be a bit of an inclusive approach, because we don't have big economies to make mistakes and just throw money to technology. The priorities will make AI a value conversation so that it brings people along. Private and public sector partnerships should also be part of the policies, and I think they're critical in not just aligning on opportunities, but also on where resources go. The third one, which I want to finish off, is upskilling, and this is where I think we're seeing across the world countries getting it wrong. Now, we are upskilling people, but we're creating people who are knowledgeable but cannot work with technology. And I think we can short circuit this and teach people how to work with technology. I mean, in the department I look after, we didn't need to take people to university to teach them about AI, but people need to work, especially frontline types of roles. People will need to learn how to work with technology. We already do that today with applications. We all use Uber to order food. So we're very acquainted with working with technology, and we shouldn't overcomplicate it so that people can acquire skills and drive that productivity that either protects them in the way they're working or drives productivity and creates need for more employment.
Are we seeing that, just a final quick question, are we seeing that in, for example, financial services yet, or are we still in the displacement part of the cycle?
So the financial sector is a bit mature, but also one thing we must appreciate, the current reality has made us realize we actually need people. And we've missed out on human intelligence because people have been for a long time occupied with routine jobs. We need people to be creative, and for you to drive that creativity, you need to actually unlock that capacity so that they can focus on understanding customers much better, understanding the needs, understanding the new risks we're facing, understanding how other disruptors are coming up with better products. But again, it brings the topic of human intelligence. I don't think we've invested enough on people in preparing them to be much more creative, to critically think, to be able to come up with products that will ignite industrialization and create services and products that are needed so that people can be part and parcel. So we actually repurposing people to where they're needed. We're making sure that, for example, people who used to do manual work are well prepared and equipped with skills to match where the need is.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. So please tee up your questions. I'm going to start coming to them. For our audience online, can I ask that you write your questions, type your questions, and keep them quite short, I think you said. So Dr. Mokgati, if I can come back to you, please. Are our institutions of training our people, do they work well? I was looking at the budget review. Over the MTF period, the skills levy is going to raise 57 billion rand. That's a lot of money, but by the end of that period for that year. Are our CETAs working well? Are our institutions in which we invest billions of rands, are they generating the skills that this new economy we've begun to look at, are they working well?
When you talk to a lot of people in industry about skills, the sense you get is that they feel that that process is not providing the appropriate kinds of skills that they need, particularly in terms of the readiness to work and the extent of competence that those processes are producing. I also think that the regulatory framework actually has created a lot of perverse incentives around training, because you can really work that system as a skills development, as a skills provider, to churn out, to run your business and churn out as many people as you can, without the obligation to ensure that those people actually land in jobs. So I think we need to strengthen those linkages. We, as I said earlier, with the production processes changing, digitization, AI, all of those processes don't mean that some of the jobs or many of the jobs that that are in mining or any other industry are no longer needed. It's really about the incorporation of new technologies into those jobs. And that's where there is also a gap, because the training programs, adjusting the curriculum and so forth, the responsiveness of your regulators, whether the SARChI or whoever, to enable institutions to change that curriculum and be responsive is not happening, quickly enough. So there are lots of inefficiencies in my view, because we've invested a lot of money in skills development and training, and the employers are doing the same in their own way. So that all that money that we've been spending is not actually being utilized efficiently.
That's certainly key. Prof. Fiona, if I can ask you, is you spoke of the need for an agile, nimble, and responsive industrial policy. I guess the greatest agility and nimbleness I've seen in our governing system recently has been Operation Vulindlela, where actually, if you look at its work, that's why load shedding is much less acute than it has been for many years now. Our logistics sector is finally being unlocked and fixed. You can see the trains moving again. Is this new nimble industrial policy you speak about, is it an adjunct of those, of getting rid of those binding restraints on our economy? Is it in energy, for example? Is it in logistics? Is it in train building? Where would you like to see that happening?
Yeah, I think Operation Vulindlela is a good example of a kind of hands-on a policy approach, trying to unblock some of the constraints. It's quite a capacity-intensive intervention from a governance perspective. But I think the effectiveness of that, it's a good exemplar of that. It might not be replicable across all domains of policy. And particularly if one looks at, let's say, the shrinking of the public service, right? Not that the size is the only indicator, but it's difficult to shrink the public service, and it has shrunk over time. I mean, we'll talk about a bloated public service, but it has shrunk.
1.3 million people? Is that shrunk?
It has shrunk proportionately from 1994 to now. Yeah, it's much smaller now as a percentage of the population and of the workforce than it was in 1994. So I don't think it's the question is about the size. It's about the effectiveness, the role of the state. Yeah, and obviously having that articulation with the private sector, which will be domain specific. It's not going to be the same in transport sector as in the energy sector and so on. The agility which you're referring to is critical in any area of policy. For example, picking up on what Renose said in relation to skills, being able to adapt to the changing needs which are out there in the workforce, being able to adapt your skills development policy to ensure that there's a workforce where you can, as much as possible, minimize that mismatch that we've been alluding to. Even in terms of industrial policy, for instance, it's about not just which sectors to promote, but which activities, which types of firms to promote, and recognizing that failure is part of the policy process. I'm not talking about a wholesale collapse of the state and wastage of resources and so on, but failure and learning is part of that, where there's that inbuilt learning process. So I'm not just saying, yes, condone any failures of governance which affect human beings, but there has to be an element of risk-taking, but building that back into improvements in the process. I think it brings us as well to back to the question of state capacity. There's different ways of enhancing state capacity. Formal education, informal, learning on the job, exchanges with other countries and so on. But I believe in the importance of learning by doing in terms of policy capacity. And it's not the only way of doing it. It's not just that, you throw inexperienced people in and kind of hope for the best. But the best way of building capabilities, public policy capabilities, let's say in terms of industrial policy, is actually by doing industrial policy. We can have a best educated staff in the DTIC and so on, but it's actually by designing and implementing industrial policies that you build up those capabilities to do it better. So we don't have to wait for some future time when, we've got this ideal state. Obviously, you need training and you need to complement prior formal education with short courses and so on. But you also just need to implement that by designing incentives, regulation and so on that responds to the needs of the economy. And in some cases, piloting those and adapting those, not waiting 3 years. On the one hand, yes, there's policy certainty. You don't want to be chopping and changing the whole time. That's not good. But complementing that with agility and adaptation.
Why do you think we have this fear of failure? That we have to get everything perfect. Sometimes we make perfection the enemy of the good. You know, is it because there's so much hostile analysis, commentary? Have you considered why we have that in our culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our policy processes are really slow. And obviously, it's that inbuilt, our processes, I think, are a lot more consultative and democratic than in many countries, and we wouldn't want to lose that. But I think that there's a way of sometimes expediting the development and implementation of policies without losing those democratic and consultative elements. Sometimes we're hesitant to just get on with it. And where there's a clear problem that needs to be addressed. I guess it's a broader political economy problem. And in some cases, yeah, I guess this also connects with what Niva was saying earlier. They are not necessarily grounded coalitions of interests that are willing and able to champion policies that go beyond very narrow interest base to defend those policies and to support the adaptation of those policies where needs be.
Thank you very much. I can feel your questions burning, so we'll take about 3 or 4 from the room and get them answered. We've only got the 2 mics, so they'll rove. Yes, please, ma'am, if you'll introduce yourself, and behind you. We're bringing the mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Kosher. I'm the Executive Director and Co-founder of the African Institute for Entrepreneurship. So it's really more of a statement, just to echo what some of the speakers have been saying. We've just recently completed work for the first ever drone sandbox that's going to take place in the Western Cape. And one of the key things that comes to mind for me, working in the entrepreneurship space, is what are the new skills, what are the new jobs that are going to support these sectors? So I'm going to give you an example. We call it new-collar jobs. And I think there's a lot of, to what the Prof brought up and Renas Mekote, is there's a need for incorporation of new technology into manufacturing. So what I'm talking about, I'll give you a specific example of a new-collar job. I have a drone, I'm flying it around, I crash it, I go into my control room, there's someone sitting behind a computer screen, they've been trained in some basic IT skills, they use a 3D printer, they print the parts, they go and reattach them to the drone. That's 2 different, that's the white and the blue collar coming together. And I think we're ignoring this huge opportunity. So I would say to you that from a strategic focus point of view, I don't think we're looking at the sectors where the opportunities are. When I look at the DTIC's focus, I don't see the sectors of tomorrow. I see the sectors of yesterday, 20 years ago. So my question is, what can we do to support those sectors and break it down? Because I open up every day on feed, on the drone industry, drone tech, fintech, health tech. I can't even tell you what the names of a lot of those jobs are. So we can't focus on the specific jobs, we need to focus on the skills. And that flexibility of the skills is what's going to give young people the opportunities.
Thank you.
So I would love to see them do the more to the research on what new collar jobs are and what are those new sectors.
Thank you very much. I was reading about China's low altitude economy, which is about drones, and so it's fascinating. At the back there, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting conversation. I'm Ofenta Madisha. I lead public policy at Uber. So one of the things that I just want to ask about is there are about 92 platforms active in South Africa. They enable 3.9 million earning opportunities. The projection is that by 2035, you'll have an additional 95 billion rand injected into the economy through these platforms. Now, what intrigued me is the conversation around the concept and the expansion of the concept about self-employment, particularly looking at the various approaches to whether deregulating the labor market, decolonizing the labor market, or segmenting the labor market. And I'd like to get some commentary on what the role of the platform economy and platform work would be in that context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a question over here.
Well, thank you very much. It's David Ngobuka, maybe HSRC candidate, business school, data management. Yeah, I think he's still gonna be enrolled in the university. So my question. So I would like to ask, since it has become a rumble in the jungle, this thing of unemployment, people are lost in the jungle. So, like for instance, I think last week, Google was launching this thing, Google Cloud. So we find there's yet an institution, public institution to offer the skills in cloud computing and what I think, and with the dish of 2.5 billion rands prior to Microsoft's drive also with the 50 billion out for capacitating and training possible candidates. We saw the president rushed for that one, for catching that cookie in the jar. So I would like also to ask, in the people are researching the public sector, we saw this thing, the passing of the two-pot system. Was it the realization of economic freedom, or was it the theft of job entry levels? Yeah, I think people, I think that one. Also the question of, I think the prior mayor of Johannesburg, which is currently now the trade and industry, Minister of Trade and Industry, with the proposition of, the value proposition of 100 billion to scale up the startups. So, but now we find the startups are already happening and taking place and already funded. So the trade and industry, would we say it was going to run under the debt deficit or the informal sector or formal sector?
Shall we take those?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Do we have onlines? A few?
Thanks, Ferial. We have about 2 questions. I'll try to bring together some of the questions so that we don't read through all of them. The first one is, what is the role of corporate South Africa, who are the owners of the factors of production, in redefining the economic structure for increased labor absorption? And then the second one is, what concrete steps can governments, financial institutions, and policymakers take to promote local processing, particularly in the context of the export of raw materials? So this is not just in South Africa, but in Africa as a whole, and support industries that enhance domestic production and employment.
There's a question. Was there another question at the back? Yes, sir. We'll just take a final one there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Program Director. The last time you and I were engaging the Commander-in-Chief at WITS on another platform. I just wanted to check, and I'm sorry I come from the VC session, Prof. Tergena. Sorry that I've been late. I want to check in the skills. I mean, all the speakers, having heard the last speaker, AI is changing the world of work forever. Now, having said that, is there enough? So the CETAs are at the core of the skills acquisition, skills evolution in the country. And there's a lot happening. And I mean, the CETAs funds us at universities and do all sorts of things. But are they fit for purpose? Are they doing enough to be able to acclimatize to this, you said with 4I are new sectors. It may be job losses in some areas, but new opportunities are created. Are the CETAs fit for purpose? Are they doing enough? And if not, what needs to be done? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. I'm going to distribute, but please feel free to jump in with anything you like. So, new collar jobs. Our policies are catering for yesterday and today's jobs, not for tomorrow's jobs. Gillard, would you like to have a crack?
I can try. I mean, this does relate to thought. In the main, I think that the premise is false. Okay, that 80% of tomorrow's jobs are going to look the same as they do now, right? And we, or in some ways similar. Okay, and that there's this fetishization of kind of of like niche technologies or even the hype around AI. To be honest, I'm incredibly cautious
You've
about.
never used
right?
ChatGPT.
Right? No, I have used it. But has it replaced me? No, right? Okay.
Give it time.
Well, is my job under like threat? I don't think so. Okay, but anyway, that's so. So I think that in the main, the kinds of jobs we need in this country are really boring jobs. Okay, we are talking about large established sectors of the economy in which we have large job potential, agro-processing, okay, new areas like in cannabis, okay, or in
nothing boring about that.
Traditional, no, but or in renewable, if you want to look at new tech, so renewable energy, but energy is a traditional long-serving sector of the economy, right? The real scale and the real sites for employment are in and sites with important multiplier effects, network effects are in not necessarily sectors which exist in South Africa, but in key manufacturing sectors, which produce the things which we need. So I'm a little bit cautious about sort of pinning, and in many ways the process of industrial upgrading is the ability to have the manufacturing skills which are quite generalized, right? And from there to be able to specialize in various technological niches. Can I just one last thing about one thing I find interesting about the conversation about skills is it is almost, and there's an assumption which relates to the online question about the role of corporate South Africa. Is the assumption is that we have a workforce that doesn't know what they need to do and are unskilled, but we have capitalists who are all just fine and like know exactly what we need to do. I had a colleague in the clothing and textiles sector who used to say, we don't have a problem in clothing because we have unskilled workers. We have a problem because we have awful capitalists, right? Who don't actually know what they're doing, right? So I just, and that's the role of what industrial policy plays also, that there is as much sort of policy guidance required on the level of business development and on the sectoral reorganization of our economy as is needed in terms of skilling one's populace.
Thank you. A question for anybody. Do you agree with Gillett that what we need is really boring, kind of old school jobs, when in fact, I'd argue that the ubiquitous worker today is the 60/60 driver? I mean, I was really interested to see that the motorbike toy of 60/60 in the ShopRite stores was the big hit seller over Christmas for kids. I'm not sure our children should be aspiring to be that, but it tells you about how big the gig economy has become. And maybe we could roll up the gentleman from Uber's question is, have we given enough attention to a 95 billion rand platform economy and what that means for shifting employment patterns? Anybody, please?
Okay, so probably I will address part of his question and this question. I think we need policies that help encourage homegrown solutions. And by that I say, small startups that either are digitizing things or even, coming up with products. And I'll give you an example. We have companies like Isazi in South Africa, an AI company that has developed a technology that digitizes hospital documents, extracts. We're likely to fall into a trap where we're importing so much technology that we're becoming consumers, that we're not actually creating economic activity from our side. As well as just making sure we collaborate or partner in the way that encourages us to reduce overdependence. Because one thing I've noticed, for example, with technology companies, when they come into a country, they actually come with their own people. They come with their own engineers. Because they've developed the product. So if we don't have platforms, let's collaborate on the fact that we're encouraging, if you talk about platforms, let's have applications that drive solutions to our own problems. And if you have many of them, you create employment, incrementally, and we help solve the problem down the line.
Thank you. Anybody else? Never, you wanted to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the point about the thing that I was trying to say precisely is things like the gig economy. Okay. The thing about the gig economy, funnily enough, we tried to do a case study on Uber 10 years ago, precisely for this reason, which is to develop that kind of self-employment. The thing about destroying self-employment in South Africa and small business generally being very weak because of that is that the institutions to support small business actually don't exist. And it's, they don't, people, and all the things that people would otherwise have gotten from their families, like someplace, like a site where they operate, skills and experience in accounting and marketing and all that from their families, but also sources of inputs, places to sell things, customer base, all of those things. People here have to start from nothing. And there's a whole range of different institutions you can have to try and replace that. But I would argue one thing we've gotten wrong as government is we tend to give you only finance or only skills. And we don't look at that context and how we can reshape that context. Whereas something like some of the gig systems or franchising or contracting out in agriculture, some of these systems actually provide a much more holistic support. But nobody in government is set up to do that. And the one thing I would say also, in terms of what Fiona was saying earlier, which I think is important, is firstly, we need to, when we talk about capacity, skills is often the least of it. I think that a lot of this conversation, we need to take into account we still have an incredibly dualized and unequal educational system, where people at the top can do all the digital stuff, but people at the bottom often come out of school, quarter dropout before matric, but even if you go through matric, many people don't have the competencies they need to be easily employable in the modern economy. And I think you don't just wish that away. Having said that, I think that means we have to say part of industrial policy should be fixing the education system. It's one thing to talk about how do we deal with people who had a bad education and give them skills in 1994, but 30 years later, we should not be having that conversation. We should be having a conversation about how do we fix education. But I also think within government, then the second thing, though, the even more is, I think Fiona was talking about, is institutional capacity and how do we understand that? How do we analyze that to understand why it doesn't work? And the one thing I would say is we inherited systems that were designed to be top-down and maintain the status quo. And that's one reason they're incredibly inflexible. They're not accountable. They're not responsive. The bureaucratic systems within the state. And structural
Are you
change.
speaking about IDC, or just give us some?
I'm speaking about all of
All of
government,
it.
and I have worked in 3 separate departments in government, and they all have these problems. We've actually raised the formal educational level within government by far. Now, we brought in a lot of people who couldn't get jobs in government before, who had degrees, who had postgraduate degrees. And I think if you were to compare the educational levels, even in the late 90s compared to the early 90s, formal education was higher. No? But if you don't change the systems, it doesn't matter how much of an education you have, it's very hard to function. If on the one hand, you're very much isolated from what's going on out there, particularly in the economy when you're talking about economic functions, and on the other hand, you're in a system that is designed to maintain the status quo and designed to insulate decision-making from democracy, except through the political, there's that whole political layer. And that's often where the fights come, because the politicians know they have to be somewhat accountable. Officials never have to be accountable. Where's Andrew? Andrew, when you were in Treasury, how much did you think about what the POVO want? As opposed to how do we deal with the deficit? And I think that's a problem. And part of that problem, though, that we inherited was it means there's no structural change requires not just flexibility, but risk management. And we have 0 risk management systems in government. So if it's too risky, you don't do it, because we can't afford the risk and we don't know how to manage that risk. And that is also why you see we keep doing the same thing over and over and getting the same respect.
Thank you. So Dr. Renosi, I'll tell you about a lovely piece of research from Old Mutual out last year. Maybe you won't think it's so cool. I did. It found that South Africa has an amazing hustle economy, that what keeps the wolf from the door often is people who are polyjobbing. Now, that may not be a great thing because it impacts on rest, etc. But there's a real entrepreneurial zeal to have a side hustle. And it's captured in the research. I guess the question, and many of those people are driving Uber cars or buying cars and then renting them out. Are our systems and policies responsive enough to the growing entrepreneurial zeal of its people?
Yeah, I think in some cases they are, maybe not consciously so, because one of the things about what you're talking about is that people need access to assets, some kind of asset, whether it's a scooter or land or an RDP house. If you look at the number of backyard dwellings that we have in this country, it's an indication of people finding a wide variety of ways to earn, to earn an income. So I would say that that's one of the aspects that we have to look at, not just, do you have skills to get employed or, to run a business, but also providing people with assets that can enable them to do that polyjobbing, and perhaps at some point really focus on a single thing that's sustainable. I'm aware of a lot of people who might work as a domestic worker, but they are also landlords where they come from, or they are also hawkers. They are selling, buying goods and selling them when they get home. So if we understand that there's that multiplicity of activities and aspirations amongst people, then our policies should also be responsive to that. We need to understand a lot more what is happening on the ground and how people are actually surviving, and have their own agency to do so, and complement that with supportive policies.
Is our business community or the people with money, are they sufficiently risk savvy to be able to support that zeal that really you can see wherever you drive in Gauteng? So deindustrialization is one story, but real hustle is another story.
I think it's something that we need to work on. We often talk about the formal sector and the informal sector, but in fact, those two sectors are interlinked. The money and goods and services flow between the two. So there must be people, large businesses out there and medium-sized businesses that understand that their bread and butter is also linked to what is happening in the informal sector and vice versa. But do we have policies that consciously look at that and try to accentuate the multiplier effects arising from that? I think that's the big question.
Thank you very much. Gillard, you wanted to say something?
I think that what your question speaks to is what I would put in as one of the sort of top 10 barriers to employment, which is access to finance. And this is for genuine business. I'm going to make a distinction in a minute between sort of businesses and what I think like Neva's talking about, and the platform economy, which I think is just a modality for shirking employment relationships, and the two are different. But there is no doubt that access to finance for most businesses in South Africa remains a major obstacle, and that's because we've got a financial sector, a oligopolistic financial sector with historic links to large industry, particularly in mining, large service sectors, and industry linked with like mining, and a financial system which was geared towards servicing those dominant sectors. And that's replicated even in the institutions which should be offering financing to more risky and innovative. So if you look at the IDC at their loan book, heavily skewed towards the traditional capital intensive, long established businesses within South Africa, right? And the ability for smaller businesses, more informal businesses, and those operating in not those sort of centers of power in the economy to access finance is significantly short. I just wanted to draw a distinction, I think, between self-employment and small businesses, which I think is an important part of this solution, and much of what we understand as a platform economy, which is really a business attempting to employ workers without having a employment relationship, right? Uber drivers are not in any genuine sense independent contractors who are running a small business in any meaningful way. They are, in all manner of speaking, largely acting as employers, as an employee whose role is to do a particular a task. You just have a large you just have an industry adverse to the obligations of employment law, which would be imposed upon them if they recognize it as like such, and seeking new ways of ripping off customers and exploiting workers, and so you have this sort of guise of the independent contractor in the gig economy. But that is not sort of genuine small business activity. It's just a hidden employment relationship.
Thank you very much. You can come back in a moment if you like, but Fiona, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I wanted to connect this discussion to one of the questions that came from one of the online participants who asked what is needed from the corporate sector. Because there are many things, but at the core is investment. And that's what we're not getting in sufficient quantities. Over the years, for example, we've had cuts in the corporate tax rate with the argument that, yeah, it's going to stimulate investment. It hasn't happened. Of course, there's many determinants of it, uncertainty, infrastructure, and so on. I don't believe that if we hadn't had those cuts in corporate tax rate, that investment would be markedly lower than it currently is. no business is a charity, and they're not going to just invest out of the goodness of their heart. I mean, years ago, this was during the Mbeki era, we used to talk about the patriotic bourgeoisie. Haven't heard that term for years, right? The capital class in South Korea, it's not that they were like nice and soft and cuddly and yes, there was an authoritarian system, but there was also rent management and conditionalities that you get this support and you get these protected markets and so on. And on condition you do this, you invest, you upgrade. And when you get profits, it's not to go and buy a new car. It's to upgrade your technological capabilities so you can compete more effectively. And those conditionalities, we're lacking them in South Africa. And investment is the lifeblood of the economy. And there's multiple determinants of it. Political, economic, and so on. I mean, if we look at countries like China even today, they're not following all of the tick boxes of the ideal recipe, but the economy is growing. And there's investment there because there will be a return. I wanted to link it also with what Gillard raised around finance. I think we have a problem in the structure and the orientation of the financial sector and the economy. I'm saying this sitting next to a hotshot from FNB here. But where there are viable products and projects and entrepreneurial ideas and so on, there does seem to be a barrier in terms of accessing finance at viable interest rates. It's not the only barrier to investment, but I think that articulation between the financial and the industrial sector remains a problem we haven't been able to address from a regulatory perspective.
I wonder, many years ago when we used to cover Finance Minister Trevor Manuel's budgets, I do remember this one thing he said in his final interview before he left. He said, "We've done everything. We have done everything imaginable, and the one thing we've never been able to achieve is the confidence of the business community." And I found that was quite a profound statement. And then you look at the 1.3 trillion rand sitting that's not being invested into this economy, and it does make me think very deeply about why that is. It's not simple risk aversion. There's something else. You look like you're just jumping out of your seat to say something.
Because there's been research on that. The thing about the reason that highly unequal economies tend to grow more slowly, and so within the normal range of inequality, there's not much difference. But when you get deep inequalities, you tend to get much more slow growth. And the research that's been done tends to suggest, because it doesn't matter what we promise business, they can see that maintaining property rights in this economy with these kinds of inequalities is difficult. And you look at some of the populist rhetoric out there, and so even if this particular government does the right thing, in the back of their minds, they're still saying, yes, but how long will this government survive?
But is that right? I spoke to a BlackRock lady the other day, and she was impermeable in her willingness to hear anything else. She said property rights are threatened. I said they're not.
No, but that's what I mean. But I'm saying because they can see that the socioeconomic, we have incredibly unequal distribution of income and assets. So we have very concentrated economic power, and we have political equality and democracy. So great equality of power based on demography in politics, and those two things come into conflict. And what's happened up until recently was that as long as, to be blunt, the ruling party could count on the votes of the majority, it didn't matter. They were being heavily lobbied by business, and business also uses power. I mean, like right now with ArcelorMittal threatening to close down if we don't do what they want. So they have power and they can lobby, and they could manage to get a lot of government policies in their direction, but they know it's not sustainable. And when the ruling party starts losing those voters, they also have to start being more accountable to them. And in a very unequal society, that means change. And business does not love change. They might benefit in the very long run, but usually they'd rather not change at all. I do think there was a window of opportunity in the 90s where they thought if we play along, and make some of these concessions and come to NEDLAC and try and negotiate industrial policy seriously, that we can make some gains. But to be honest, when they went, I mean, you're in business, you can tell me, but when they went through state capture, they now tend to say, it doesn't matter what we do. They're just going to steal it. Why should we bother? And I think that is a problem. But I do think, really, truly, not just here, but everywhere where there are very unequal societies, you tend to see low investment because they are inherently unstable. Thank
you very much. I thought we were quite stable, but I hear you.
I mean, I I agree with you. I think objectively we're very stable, but from the point of view of business, they worry that we can't, you know, and when I say maintain property rights, they also mean things like don't tax us too much, you know, don't have too big a deficit, all of those things, which, you know.
Mark.
Yes, so I think beyond funding, I think we need to establish frameworks for having a shared value proposition where some of the most innovative ideas or solutions should be shared with other sectors. I think funding alone, I mean, it's a big one, but if you think about some of the inefficiencies we're seeing in the public sector, or some of the problems we could solve by being proactive, the finance and the corporate sectors leads through innovation. It spends time, you know, maturing its solutions, and I think there needs to be a way to collaborate beyond funding to share some of these solutions and practices to help other sectors glean the same benefits. Now, I think we have a bit of a gap in engineering the public and private sector partnership. Now, the top 10 tech companies in America actually are run through higher education institutions. I think we need to find a model that helps the public sector and the corporate and the corporate sector work on prioritizing areas of collaboration where the private sector will feel it's actually is very easy to put money in these solutions, but also as a result will create opportunities because you need people to work on those projects. So that collaboration is very important, you know, being driven by areas of priority.
Thank you very much. Did you want to respond maybe? Only if you're comfortable, huh?
I think it's a dialogue, and a lot of times, you know, people are surprised to find, you know, people from Uber in some of these rooms, you know, so that's okay. I think maybe who's not a driver, but you know, I find the discussion quite interesting, and you know, we do a lot of work on these themes from an academic perspective. The primary concern that I have is, you know, just the depth of understanding in terms of what it actually takes to run and operate a technology platform, and the margins thereof, you know, and this is one of the themes that we're working on with some of the special economic zones and tech hubs, just to support them on that front. But I think the most stimulating comment is really related to, you know, the idea that platforms are trying to skirt away from the employment relationship. And I really find that, you know, line of argument intriguing, obvious and predictable, because the current dialogue at the moment from the panelists, we've heard 3 proposals: deregulating the labor market, segmenting the labor market, and thinking about different ways to introduce more employment without having a very low wage sector. Then you couple that with access to financing. On these platforms, you have programs like the ones from Airbnb, where they're supporting small businesses. You've got initiatives from Sweep South, where they're trying to really help domestic workers to develop themselves and access finance. Even on the Uber platform or other platforms, we work with small businesses. Like, you start off as a driver, 5 years down the line, you've got 5 drivers who are operating under your platform. And it's quite a unique, dynamic space. And I wonder what that actually is, you know, which is why I asked the question. It's not to say, you know, we know the answer. I'm trying to understand indeed, you know, what is that type of worker in the South African context, particularly with a comment like decolonizing labor in South Africa.
Thank you very much. We've got 2 final questions, and then we'll do a wrap round because we're nearly at time.
Okay, thank you very much. I am Lipazi. I'm from the Sustainable Human Settlements Construction Center. My submission to the dialogue is a bit broad, and it's not structured, but
short.
In my submission, yes, there will be structure somewhere. And I think first and foremost, I think I need to commend Neva. I feel like if we have more people that understand the current discourse of what's currently happening in South Africa, I think we will definitely be progressive. In the last comment she did regarding what is currently happening in relation to implementation. But obviously the conclusion of my submission is, before I enter into it, it's more or less political will is critical and central to most of these issues, of this important topic. Political will. Obviously, we are forming part of a major discourse as academics, some of us here. But at the end of the day, we do have leaders who have to be the ones that give stamp to most of these discussions, especially around this important dialogue. But in relation to the actual subject matter, I also think even in organization, any organization, it's important to have your needs analysis. What are the pain points of your current context within your organization, of how do you have to change going forward in relation to amending your internal policies. I feel like if you were to do that properly as leaders within your structures and organizations, you will be able to know what must really happen and the changes that should occur at that particular point in time. And I think we should take that into note. But in relation to the type of approach we should approach, especially from an academic point of view, we don't want to be recycling current employers. We have students already within the current context. And just to improve on the issue of reskilling and skilling, as we are skilling our students where we are as academics, we need to remember that as well, to say, let's do it right, so that by the time they are out there, they are able to adjust with what's there in the corporate space, or it could be in employment. And obviously within the current context of employers and employees, yes, you can still upskill them and skill them the right way. And I think policies, there's quite, you can do comparisons and you will be able to see what you have to do. I think it includes your what do we call this? Mental health support. It can be stipends for remote work and so forth. But I think at the end of the day, leadership is critical to all this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Budi. I'm a final year student here at UJ, economics student here. So actually what I wanted to say is that I think our country, there's a problem with monetary policy. Yeah, that's the
Monetary or monitoring?
monetary policy. Yeah, because the economy needs, South African economy needs monetary easing, like it needs lower interest rates. As low as much as possible, like lower interest rates. These interest rates that we are operating in currently are so much that small businesses can't access funding, they can't expand, and which means they can't hire. So what's crippling our economy is the monetary policy only. And then
I'll bring the central bank governor here next time.
Yes, I wanted to come to that point that you need to remove that guy. I wanted to remove the whole monetary policy committee. It needs to be removed.
Okay.
Because access to funding is the only solution to the country.
Okay.
Our country has resources. Our country has people. Our country has skills. Our country has everything. We need cash. We need money to run economic activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Lady over there, and then that's the last one. I'm so sorry. And then.
Thank you very much. I am Musa Mac, and I am in the legislative sector. So my comment really pertains to the need for government to continually infuse industrial policy into the higher learning education imperatives. The main important thing thereof is that South Africa, as a country, it continuously gets to export technology, and that provides us with an opportunity as a country to pivot it is important that the country as itself gets to consider how it is that science and technology and engineering, as well as mathematics, gets to be the key pillars and it get to be the key imperatives thereof when it comes to funding. So that's the main thing that I'm bringing to the table, that it has to be considered thereof. And another one is that Dani Rodrik actually indicated that the future of work is very technology skills intensive, and organizations investing in technology to replace labor should be one thing that is considered. It's one thing that organizations are continuously trying to leverage as much as they can, and they're also trying as much as they can to ensure that they gain a lot of profit, and in so doing, trying to make as much profits as they can, it really affects the labor itself, and that provides an opportunity thereof for regulation. There has to be a regulation of the use of technology, especially by the private sectors, because one thing that people are, employees are actually concerned about is, would we not get to a point where the human capital is completely erased and it replaced rather by technology? So those are considerations that should be put around when it comes to policy thereof. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Ntabise Nkoza, and I'm an assistant lecturer from the School of Public Management and Governance. From the discussion, I just want to bring one other aspect, which is the digital inequality. Now we're talking about how AI has been introduced and it's been rolled out, but we need to look at the fact that there are still areas here in South Africa that do not have the digital infrastructure. Yes, we can think about the idea of being an Uber driver, but when you have the scooter and the phone, but there's no internet in that area, how are you going to do your business? You come to university, you study these essential technological skills, but how do you go back home to do that social impact to those kids that have bare minimum digital skills? Yeah, that's my submission.
Thank you very much. Very important consideration. So to our panel, we're going to begin winding up now. You all sit in positions of enormous influence, power, and analytical ability. But I would like you to maybe just consider playing with me for a final round. Say you were appointed to the cabinet, which is not impossible when I look at all of you. What would be your first order of business? Should that happen? And if you want to give consideration to some of the comments in your answers, please do, but maybe not to fire Lesetja Khanyago. Sorry. Who'd like to shoot first? Mark, you were dying for this one. Huh?
So, as a Minister of Technology?
Minister of Technology, go.
I think I'll set up a strategy that articulates very clearly how South Africa is going to leverage all these technologies, AI, data. But not just a strategy, it's a strategy that is specific enough on how this technology is going to apply on the identity of South Africa. Our challenges are very unique, as well as our opportunities, as well as the risks that this technology brings to South Africa. And the way they actually influence things like employment. So we need a very specific strategy targeted with specific areas of focus that ensures we don't make mistakes. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have big economies. Now that is a reality of the problem. To make sure that this technology not just helps reimagine the future, but also provides hope to society, because we have an opportunity to change things, to solve social problems, to position ourselves as a country that is, a superpower. But that can only happen if we have a strategy that is realistic, practical, and targeted towards where we're going to be.
Thank you very much. Fiona?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to pivot back to the concept of inclusive growth and inclusive development. as the leitmotif and central focus of the work at SARChI-ID, the great work which is coming out there. And to bring that back to the discussion we've been having this afternoon, if we look at what we kind of euphemistically call the triple challenges in South Africa, inequality, unemployment, poverty are so extreme that we can't grow our way out of them. Both because we can't reach and sustain the rates of growth that would address those within a feasible period of time, but also more fundamentally that these triple challenges are themselves a binding constraint on growth. I don't think we can grow being as unequal and having such extreme levels of poverty that are more akin to those of a low-income country, so such a high proportion of the workforce out of work and so on. So it's not something where we can grow and then be like, oh, we'll deal with that later. Inclusive growth, everyone talks about it, but I don't think it's sufficiently integrated and across all domains, energy policy, macroeconomic policy, trade policy, and so on. Because unless we can really bring those levels of inequality, unemployment, and poverty down, I think we're going to remain in this low growth trap that we are in. And it just can't continue like this indefinitely.
Thank you.
So where to start? I would, as the Minister of in the Department of Youth and Children, take what Fiona has said and insist that we look at inclusive growth and its outcomes from a life cycle point of view, starting with the child who's born today. What is it that we're going to do differently for that child so that when they become 18, they are not part of our 60% unemployed youth statistic? I would look at the current youth. What is it that we should be doing for them? And also people that are already in employment, because we're talking about integrating young people into the labor market, into livelihoods, whether they are self-employed and so forth, but their mothers, their fathers, their uncles, their aunts are losing jobs. So we can't look at this from a piecemeal point of view, because we plug one hole, another one opens somewhere else. And so that integrated approach for me is what I would insist that we need to focus on as a cabinet, not operate in silos where everybody wants to be seen as, this is what I've achieved, that's what I've achieved, blame this one and blame that one. Change the whole way of thinking with that lens on inclusive growth, but understanding who are the various target members of the population that we need to attend to in order to achieve that.
Thank you very much. Niva.
Yeah, well, first let me say, it's not like ministers have a whole lot of power. Part of the problem is government reflects, in a very unequal society, government reflects the divisions in society. So, it becomes just, you're going to spend, whatever you think you're going to do, you're going to spend most of your time negotiating with cabinet to agree to prioritize youth. And they'll say, yes, we'll prioritize youth. But we also have to prioritize, what are we going to do about steel? And we have to deal with Trump, and we have to do all this other stuff. And by the time you're done, yeah, you get a 10% budget cut at the end of the year. So I'm just saying.
I think you need to change.
Yeah. And
School of hard knocks speaking.
Oh,
yeah?
Jesus, yeah. And all I'm saying is, because as long as society is deeply divided, so will government be. But having said that, what I would do is, the one thing I think that would help is to say we need very clear priorities for government that we know they'll be judged by. And to me, that should be employment creation and reasonable growth rates. So stop saying we're going to get to 5% tomorrow and start saying, and if you don't get there, there will be consequences. That would help. Because right now, we're great at setting KPIs. We rarely monitor whether we reach them, and when we don't reach them, and when nothing happens, it just goes on again, So I think we need some way of saying, how do we meet that feedback loop, which I think really, given a coalition government, in some ways we have more opportunities, because there's more incentive to say we do have to show that we're performing. And I think, to me, the thing would be, again, it's easy to prioritize growth and exports and all of that stuff, but to prioritize employment creation, creating opportunities on a mass scale for people is hard. And that's why I would make that the top priority, because the other stuff actually will get in there anyways. But whatever, in that context, two things to think about: how do we give communities more agency? So it's not always, the service delivery paradigm where we give it to you, but it's where you can mobilize yourselves and have power to make decisions as collectives, whether it's as workers or as small enterprise or as municipalities. How do we think about that kind of much more accountable bottom-up agency for people, and have dedicated capacity to ensure that the priority actually happens? And that, okay, I could get technical. At this point, we always say it has to be in the presidency because, anyways, yeah. Do you remember the super ministry for economics that never got anywhere? And then where I totally would agree is, and we have to prioritize as part of economic policy fixing education. And what that also means is for established business, not that you ignore them, but that we need to be clear, I would argue, that if you're serious about supporting established business, stop pretending they will be a key agency for change in themselves, and rather say, how do we get the fundamentals right so they can continue to grow and develop, and we can guide them occasionally. But they're not going to bring about the kinds of structural change we need on their own, unless government creates that context that makes it worthwhile, as I think Fiona actually said. But particularly, it doesn't help if we do things like say, okay, we know that the price of iron ore and coal has gone up. We're not going to ensure those rents go to downstream. We just let it happen all the time. So what made industrialization possible in South Africa historically was that the rents from mining went downstream into electricity, steel, and Sasol. We got rid of that process. We need to fix that. We need to make sure the infrastructure works for industry and not just say, oh, there's load shedding, too bad, for a full year before we do something. Ditto for Transnet and so on. But also do something about the monopoly on skills, where we basically allow people to leave the country when they have an education, but we don't allow people to come in if they have one. And support upgrades in technology in the established industries, but not just provide unconditional support without any kinds of upgrades for dominant producers. And I mean, right now I'm looking at Newcastle, that's why. Okay.
Thank you very much. Last word.
Thanks, Rio. I'm going to leverage off this idea of placing employment at the heart of policy, and in particular emphasize that I think that's essential for macro policy, which is traditionally not focused on objectives like employment, although it sort of fundamentally should be. And I think that's essential in at least three ways. Firstly, it's a key area of policy in and of itself. The second is that what we have in South Africa is economic policy areas which pull in opposite ways, right? So you have industrial policies attempting to grow employment and output, but then you have the underinvestment in our roads or in our rail or in our port, and these things pull in opposite ways. And the third reason is because macro policy really sets the trajectory and the lane in South Africa for other policy areas. And to place employment at the heart would mean a fundamental rewriting of our macro policy, which I hope would lead to a change in guard at the Reserve Bank, amongst other institutions, a regime in they're doing enormous damage, and that those elements of policy have to take seriously. One the employment imperatives. One's practical implication of that, and then I'll end, links to a public's role in investment. We all have heard that in this recent budget, so we think there has been this enormous emphasis on a public investment. Unfortunately, our levels of investment in South Africa at the moment sit at about 15% of GDP. That's about half of what the NDP envisages. Over the last 3-year period, government investment actually grew at about an average of about 13%. Over the medium-term expenditure framework, these sort of much lauded investment plans invest at about an increase of under 5%. We do not have a government and a treasury who takes seriously the needed levels of investment. We still spend less per learner and per healthcare user than 6 years ago. And if you want to lower employment costs in a way that I think is sustainable with our economy, then improve the social wage, make sure that workers have the access to healthcare, transport, education. That's a way of actually making the reproduction of the labor force far more cost effective and lowering wage input. So we need to, there is no doubt a quality and efficiency issue with government spend, but we need to take seriously the levels of investment in social and economic infrastructure, which are needed to have employment at the heart of our policy. Thanks.
Thank you very much to all of you. You know, in a time where there's adulation for the chainsaw and for the appalling policy implementations we see happening in the US and of Elon Musk occupying so much of the political space, it was lovely to listen to a conversation that brought its full heart to bear on a pressing issue of our time. Thank you so much. I pass on to my colleague.
Ferial, and to our panelists and our audience for such a vibrant conversation that touched on so many aspects of employment, the ability of the country to absorb labor, the formal and informal economy, and the role of the private sector and the state in grappling with these issues. These are all issues that we grapple with every day at SARChI-ID at various levels, and obviously other researchers at other universities and within UJ itself. Policy dialogues such as this are an important way to encourage public engagement with the research and linking it to policy. And so in that way, we move on to unveiling the newly designed Econ 3x3 website. I'd like to welcome Pippa Green, who will take us through some of the updates and highlights, how the platform is opening up new opportunities for young researchers. Thanks, Pippa.
Thank you, Phumzile. I just have to plug this in to get the website up. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to do that and say a few thanks, but I do want to say beforehand, I don't want to pronounce at all on monetary policy, but I do want to say that at least I bumped into the governor of the Reserve Bank at a function about 2 months ago, and he had his arm in a sling, and I asked him what had happened to his arm, and he said, I've been fighting inflation. So at least he's got a sense of humor, even if you don't like the policy. So let me just show you, I just want to say a few words before about the debate. Thank you very much to the panelists and for Ferial for conducting this debate so beautifully and usefully in terms of the ideas that came out. And a word on how we can harness this kind of research and ideas for policy making, and that's where Econ 3x3 is so central. So about 10 or 11 years ago, when Andrew persuaded me to get involved in READY, he said a sentence which is stuck in my mind, which is that it's time that we persuaded policymakers to make evidence on the basis of policy rather than ideas in their heads. And it was a very profound thing to say at that particular moment. And in fact, when READY was launched and Econ 3x3, in the 2017 budget, Pravin Gordhan actually consulted those researchers, many of the READY 3x3 and Econ 3x3 researchers about the budget, and he took some of the ideas on board. What we didn't calculate on was that he was fired, I think, a few months later, and you had a series of kind of 3 or 4 finance ministers. Is this projecting the thing? So what Econ tries to do, as much as it tries to get policymakers to listen to the research, it's to try and get the researchers to communicate in a way. Yes, please, thank you. Here it is. To try and get researchers that can communicate in a way that makes their research relevant, and that's what Econ has tried to do. So this. Thank you very much, first of all, for those organizations and people who've invested in this new website, from SARChI-ID in particular, Abena and Kezia, and thanks to the British High Commission, which has also helped by investing in SARChI-ID, Econ 3x3, through SARChI-ID, because the idea is to get the research out. So what we did in the launch, and I'm going to just show you where this is. I have to look here. So this is something, these are the new articles. We put out a call for proposals to a whole lot of economics PhD students and young early career economists, and we got a whole lot back. I can't remember how many, 40 or 50, and out of those we chose 10 or 11. And they wrote their articles, and we edited them and sent them back and had this kind of discussion. And they were really interesting, the ranges of what they did. So they ranged from whether village chickens in parts of the Eastern Cape can basically pad out a food value chain enough to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and improve them, to innovation and whether that can improve township economies for the youth. I'll show you some of them. So this is where you go to this is the home page. This is where the About Us and who we are. So it came out of the READY project, as Andrew says. It's now part of SARChI-ID, and SALDRU hosts it. And I actually want to show you the articles because they are very nice things. I was surprised that just on evidence-based policy and media involvement in that, because I'm not an economist, I also was a journalist for many years, that when the VAT hike happened in the budget, I found very little media coverage of actually what the evidence was about what the alternatives were for tax hikes. Andrew wrote a very good piece for Econ about where spending could be cut, the hidden pockets of spending that could be cut. But nobody really looked at where the progressive taxation opportunities were, or where the regressive, where taxation was regressive. It was a kind of a populism that took over without real evidence. So these are the articles. These are some of the new people, completely new PhD students who have written articles based on their research. So this is about producer price rises. They're saying that when the production price of maize and wheat goes down, it's the consumers don't get the benefit of it. But when they go up, they pay more for bread. That's quite an important thing about inequality and poverty. Andrew's article on that he spoke about earlier. We had 2 or 3 articles on what happens to graduate employment and unemployment in South Africa. One which actually said something a little bit different from this, but it was quite interesting anyway, about whether the returns to education are getting more. And the answer is they have got The education has improved considerably in the post-apartheid era, but the returns to education are getting slightly higher, but at not the same speed. This is about a piece about the digital divide, which I think somebody, Renosi, somebody mentioned it here in the discussion, and here's an article about how the township economy could actually unleash youth entrepreneurial power if one can try to address this gap. So there are really quite good ideas, good research ideas here from all aspects about innovation, technology. It's not up on the website yet, but one article about whether the ZEP, the Zimbabwean exemption permit, when it was implemented, actually improves or harms the prospect of local employment. And the results are quite interesting. All of it is all of these young people have done very, very detailed and sometimes quite technical analyses, which I took the technical part out so everyone can understand it. And we hope people in government can as well. So it just remains for me really to thank you all very much for coming. And for the panelists again. But I do want to say just once more, a big thank you to SARChI-ID, to UNU-WIDER, Kezia, Jordan, where's Abena? To Abena, and to the British High Commission for your investment in this country, in this project. And we do hope that it can sharpen evidence-based policy making and sharpen a debate about the really central gripping problems that we have as the country going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pippa. And now I'd like to welcome Mr. Mike Foster to close today's program. He's the Economic Counselor at the British High Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so it is past 4 o'clock on a Friday. After this, there are drinks. And I've spent a bit of time in universities, so I know which way your minds are heading, and it's probably not looking forward to a long speech from me. So let me just quickly do 3 things, actually. So first, I just wanted to apologize very quickly for missing the start of this event. If it's any excuse whatsoever, I was with colleagues from the presidency talking about the OV model and how they're going to be putting that through the Johannesburg working group that the president has established. So as residents of this city, I hope you'll at least forgive me for being slightly tardy. The second thing I wanted to do is just do a very quick round of thanks to the people who were involved in making this all happen. So UJ and the business school for hosting us, SARChI-ID and the SARChI teams for organizing the whole thing. I wanted to thank absolutely Ferrell and our whole panel for a really fascinating discussion, and also Pippa for the work on the Econ 3x3 website, which is looking fantastic. So thank you. And my third and final thing, and then you can all move to drinks, is just to offer just a couple of very quick thoughts on why this matters. And I really think that this dialogue, this website, the whole SARChI program matters because evidence-based policy matters. It's not enormously popular in the White House right now, but that doesn't mean that it's not incredibly important. And I think the real point is that evidence-based policy is all about getting a wide range of views and really giving them the sort of exposure to be tested in the light of day and the breath of fresh air. So I think this is just an incredibly important program. We're really proud as the UK government to be supporting it, and I think particularly great to see it focusing on questions of employment, because there really is, I think, no challenge more pressing for this country right now. And I mean that both in the very short-term sense, and for what it's worth, when I talk to ministers in the GNU, actually from not just one party, but from a couple, they definitely feel like they are going to be judged on the employment rate come the next election. And I think that's a very positive step, actually. But also it's the most pressing question, really, because, on a very long run timeline, the question of whether South Africa can get to a more inclusive economic model is at the heart of why nations fail or why they don't fail, right? So it's an incredibly important agenda. It's really exciting to see it progressing, and we're just very, very pleased to be involved. So our final thanks goes to all of you for making the time to be part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
This is the last time, I promise. That concludes our dialogue today. Thank you so much to our panelists, all of our guests online and in person. A special thanks goes to Ferial for guiding such a vibrant conversation. Thanks to the colleagues at Econ 3x3. I'd like to encourage, all my researcher colleagues to submit their research, to Econ 3x3. It will help us to make our work more accessible, and make more people read it than, ourselves. To get to the Econ 3x3 website, there's a QR code on the program. So you can just scan that code. It will take you straight to the website. Please do join us outside for cocktails, where you can carry on the conversation over refreshments. But could the panelists, Mike Foster, Prof. Leibrand, Andrew Donaldson, and Pippa, please stay behind for photos. Thank you. And thank you so much.